Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. I am Kelly Birmingham, and this is a 25-year look across the spectrum, chronicling my 25, actually now 28 years working in the field of ABA and with children and adults with autism and developmental disabilities. And with me, as always, is my partner in crime, Jen, mom to Dylan and Ethan. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Kelly.
I know your camera's not working if anyone's watching
Yeah.
on the YouTube channel, but you're here in spirit. A-
Yes.
And so, people to our newcomers to our podcast, we take topics related to the field of autism and or ABA and talk it through from a BCBA and a caregiver's perspective. And today, before we get into the podcast, I always have to give a shout out to our sponsor, Site Pro. They offer a wide range of engaging and practical continuing education courses developed by BCBAs for BCBAs. You can visit their website at sitepro.com to see their complete CEU library, including all of our podcasts that are on there. And I think there's hours and hours of content at this point that people are listening to through Site Pro, but you also can listen through it. That's if you want CEUs as a BCBA. You also can listen on Apple and Spotify. So that's pretty cool. Our
Yes.
listenership is
Woohoo.
growing steadily.
Awesome.
So today's topic is actually not 100% related to autism. It's actually has more to do with Down syndrome. And this video that went around, I know everyone I know posted it on their social media, and it's on YouTube. So it's public out there. It's called Assume That I Can. And so I actually am going to play the video. It's only like a minute and a half long. So you can either see it and or listen to it through the podcast. But it is quite moving. So let's listen to it, Jen.
Yes.
Hey bartender, you assumed that I cannot drink a margarita.
Check. Can you hear that, Jen?
It's a little low.
Okay, that's what I thought. So let me get the sound up. Sorry about that. Sound's up. Okay, let me try it again.
Hey bartender, you assumed that I cannot drink a margarita, so you don't serve me a margarita? So I don't drink a margarita. Your assumption becomes reality. And parents, you assume that I cannot live on my own, so you don't encourage me to live on my own, so I don't live on my own. Coach, you assume that I cannot hit harder, so you don't train me to hit harder, so I don't hit harder. And teacher, you assume that I cannot learn Shakespeare, so you don't teach me Shakespeare. Old Donald had a farm, so I don't learn Shakespeare. E-I-E-I-O. But hey, if all your assumptions become reality, then you assume that I can drink a margarita. So you serve me a margarita, so I drink a margarita. I assume that I can live on my own, so I live on my own. I assume that I can hit harder, so I hit harder. I assume that I can learn Shakespeare. So, what fools these mortals be? I learned fucking Shakespeare. You assume I can swear, right? I assume that I can do that job. That I can go to parties. That I can have sex. That I can be on stage. I assume that I can. So maybe I will.
Wow,
So great.
super powerful, right?
Yeah.
So I don't even know where to start on that because I hope I'm saying my age is definitely showing it at my language these days, but I think one thing that comes out for me is that there are clearly some physical features that sort of mark Down syndrome, right? And not for autism. And so, but on the other hand, I think there are things maybe if you're autistic that might like mark you, and I'm saying mark in a bad way, right? Like people judging, like
Mm-hmm.
in this video. And so, and I know working with Special Olympics, you see this all the time. And so there's all this like bias and judgment that comes into this that I am sure I have done over my lifetime.
Yeah. I think we probably all have.
Right. And so it even made me think back on both like kids I've worked with and also like my own stepdaughter and things related to this. And so I was going to unpack a couple of it through this with you. But what I wanted to first is I always like to throw out there as BCBAs, the field of ABA has gotten it actually gets a lot of flack during the month of April. April's a tricky month for a lot of people. I am friends with different sets of groups of people, right? And it used to be the puzzle piece and autism awareness. And then there was thought that the puzzle piece meant you were only a piece of something, not whole. So the infinity loop came, and then it changed from awareness to acceptance. But I'm on different chat groups, and so it gets really convoluted in my mind, which is why I want to talk about this video, is because there's also the group of folks that aren't going to live on their own, right? Aren't going to drink the margarita and aren't, maybe going to have the job or something without support. I mean support, right? 24-hour support, which is Dylan.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a whole group of people that are like more profoundly impacted. Same with Down syndrome. There's a range within Down syndrome of skills and abilities. And so once again, I'm always going to say, like, it's all of the things, not one or the other. And that's what happens during this time of the year, is it's like becomes all of the other. And like the profound groups are fighting with the neuroclastic people and saying, right. And so it gets for you and I, we're caught up in that world all the time. As BCBAs, I'm caught up in it all the time, being an ABA provider. And it struck me on an article I read the other day that our work as ABA providers, when it's funded through insurance or regional centers, is very deficit based, right? I've talked a little about this before. We're supposed to go in and find all the problems, and functional behavior assessments were about finding the problems and then fixing the problems by teaching new skills. Now our field, and this was true for me 20 years ago when I wrote my first social skills book, to me, ABA has always should be more focused on skills-based training, right? Learning skills.
Yeah.
And I felt like this has represented this. And you and I have talked on and on and on about quality of life. Our last 2 podcasts were about quality of life and social validity, right? Like social validity in my world means, are we teaching goals that are meaningful to this person? And this video showed this exactly that, like socially meaningful to this person.
Yes.
So I'll stop blabbing on in a minute, just to quote the BCBA ethics code. Everyone's seen this one and heard it. It's 2.09, involving clients and stakeholders, right? Behavior analysts collaborate with colleagues from their own and professions. I'm sorry, wrong one. 2.09, involving clients and stakeholders. Behavior analysts make appropriate efforts to involve clients and relevant stakeholders throughout their service relationship, including selecting goals, selecting and designing assessments and behavior change interventions, and conducting continual progress monitoring. And this video shows that not happening at all, right? That no one asked her. So, there's a difference between someone who can tell them, like, yeah, I want to have a margarita. Yeah, I want to have sex. Yeah, I want to live on my own, right? And so I was just having a discussion at my company today, at what age are we going to start including our clients in the goal-making process? And we said as young as 8 years old at this point. Now, number was arbitrarily picked. We're looking through to sort of get specifically at what age might be the best, and we're looking through it, but we kind of for now said, all right, let's probe 8 years old. And
That's really good,
right, let's
because
see. Go ahead, go.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I might be off base here. I'm thinking school wise, but
Yep.
I don't remember anyone actually including Dylan in his goals or like asking him questions until he was going for his last last IEP. And the reason I think they were doing it was because he was going to be moving into a transition to adult program, so they're finally asking him like what his wishes and things were, based on, putting him in appropriate adult day program for like job training and stuff. I mean, I might be crazy, but I'm pretty sure.
I went to most of the IPs. I don't remember that part either.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I want to ask you about. So I know, like I said, at Easter Seals, I'm involved in our social skill department and our new starting center-based ABA department. And again, we had a workshop today where I was leading my team and we were doing work around like neurodiversity and neurodiversity affirming care, which are the latest buzzwords,
Mhm.
and assent meaning making sure our clients want to even be at social skill groups and participate, which led us down the path about not only asking them, but including them in their goals.
Mhm.
Right. So for our group of kids that we're working with, they can tell us, right? They're in
Yeah.
our social skill groups and they can tell us. Some can tell in better, in more detail than others, but
Mhm.
it made me think about Dylan, right? Dylan is limited in his verbal skills. Like he can tell
Mhm.
you, he can
Yeah.
recite schedules, right? He can tell you some things he wants,
Mhm.
answer yes or no questions. But I wanted to walk through some of these things and have our listeners hear how you would have someone like your son Dylan be involved in the goals. So let's start with
Mhm.
school, right? Like, what are some ways looking back now you think Dylan could have included in his IEP and in determining his goals?
I mean, they could. I think they always ask me like
Mm-hmm.
what, and then it was always like, what are his interests? What, it's always the same questions.
Yep.
What is he good at? Or, what are his strengths? What does he like? What does he not like? But I will say, like, even maybe not just verbally, but Dylan a lot of times will express things he wants or enjoys or doesn't like by like showing you, like whether it's like, going and getting out specific like, toys, or he's very visual, or he's very good at pulling stuff up on the computer online. Um, he loves plays, so he'll like pull out play bills, things like that. So if you were to ask him, like, I guess more specific, but down to a language that he could express himself, I think you could actually probably get a lot more out of him, like to find out what actually his input is.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. It made me think about like as an A now I'm going to talk about like ABA in home. As an ABA provider, we do ask parents and we have different assessments that are called preference assessments, but
Hmm.
we're often using them specifically to determine if something will be reinforcing or not. And to
Hmm.
be used as a reinforcer is generally how that's thought of. But I've always, and when I ran my social skills programs and had my company, I would spend a significant amount of time doing what we call in ABA a free operant observation,
Hmm.
like when Dylan came in the first time and trashed everything in my office.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right? But from that, I learned so much, right? So like I might be in there observing, or if I'm in someone's home, I'm going to watch them for really long periods of time to see what they like to do and how they respond to
Hmm.
different things. And I'm going to use that information not only to determine like what's a reinforcer, but like what do they like to do and how maybe they would like to do more of it and better, right?
Hmm. Well, or I've actually seen this a little bit. There's different like apps and stuff too that you could also use, like Cahoots or something,
Oh
or
yeah.
like where it maybe it's like a multiple choice thing of like to try to see if, like, I know he's really good at that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then maybe he could express like what his interests are, what he wanted to do based on that. You know what I mean?
That's a
He's
really
good at sequencing. He's good, you know what I mean? Things like that. Making choices computer wise, like then just verbally trying to say what he likes.
good
And then
point.
sometimes Dylan's a goofball because he'll also like, because so like you and I would know, but like he'll sit there and say like almost like the opposite to you,
Mhm. Mhm.
like on purpose, and then like laugh when like he is super scared and hates swans, but he's like obsessed with them. So
Right.
sometimes if someone's like, what's your favorite animal, and he'll say swan, and like you and I especially know That's definitely not true. Like, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So it made me think, like, we did a whole podcast on like leisure skills and activities. And if you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it, because we actually talk a lot about this in there, and how like um you spent a lot of time looking at Dylan's leisure skills. And I selfishly did that podcast because at Easter Sales, we're doing a research study actually
Mhm.
for those that are profoundly impacted that have little leisure skills. If we can teach them leisure skills, that would increase their happiness and decrease their challenging behavior.
Mhm.
So we're like we're right in the methods planning of it right now. And we're going to start it pretty soon. And it just made me think when we were going through it, we were like, well, let's make a list of their leisure skills. And then it was like, duh, let's have them tell us, right? And then so most of them are not vocal like Dylan, but
Mhm.
we made this massive list of things. We obviously asked the parents, but then we took like different variations of them. So for instance, there's this one man who likes his iPad, but he
Mhm.
tends to get overstimulated by it. And
Mhm.
he'll rewind it back and forth, and it will get him so
Yeah.
stimulated that it often leads into an aggression cycle.
Oh, okay.
But
Well, they
instead,
like to rewind, Kelly, you know
yeah,
that.
I do. For him, it would overstimulate him often, not
Mhm.
every time, but sometimes if he couldn't get exactly rewound the exact
Mhm.
way into a quite an aggressive experience. But what we ended up doing was we actually used like a shaping procedure and taught him how to watch a movie from start to finish. And
That's great.
now he can sit there and watch that from start to finish. And that came
Mhm.
about because we were trying to think about what does he like, and how can we include him in the choosing of what he would like to do with his life.
That's awesome.
And so like back to this video, like assume that I can. I think that in the ABA world, we're often assuming that they can't. Can you think of a time when someone assumed Dylan couldn't do something and it turns out he could?
Oh yeah, there's plenty of those, but
Will you share one?
I mean, I think there was one time that actually all of us cried. Like this is, I think we were all even guilty of it. Do you remember the time that he actually he had like it's like fridge magnets, and I mean he was really young, like kind of like closely diagnosed, when you
Mhm.
first started working with him, and he took all the magnets himself until he lined them up like in the alphabet. And like I was blown away on that. Or like I think a lot of times people don't think he understands or is listening, and then he totally is, and then he'll repeat something or he'll say something about it even later in his way. And I always get mad that people just assume he's just, if someone's not very verbal, that means that they're not receptive. I think that's been a huge challenge with Dylan, like as far as people and their perception of him. And then I think a lot of times they always thought, well, she's just mom and she's probably just like, she wants it to be this way. So she's just saying he does understand, when I know he does. And he's proven, several times that he does. So, I mean, that's always been, I think, a really big one for me.
I remember when he put all the letters together. That's right. And he was not verbal, and his attention skills were pretty
Yeah.
off. And so you are right. I remember it was like I can admit that. I was like, I don't know how much information he's processing and bringing in. That was early
Hmm.
on. And then he put it all together, and it was like, not only was he taking it all in from things, but second of all, he had such strong sequencing skills, right?
Hmm.
And organizing skills that then became a way to teach him.
Hmm.
So
For sure.
there's a term that's called, and some people like it and some don't. I like it. It's called presumed competence. And
Hmm.
I'm reading the definition, and it's considered a strengths-based approach that assumes people with autism have abilities to learn, think, and understand. Right. And so if you go into it automatically, and I feel like hopefully you feel this way, but it took a little bit of time. But then it was kind of like, wait a minute, Dylan totally gets all this. So I vividly remember shifting myself and saying, I'm just going to talk to him at the age he's at. right? Because
Yeah.
I remember doing the like short sing-songy voice. Like I was trained that way 20 years ago. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
Dylan, touch
Mm-hmm.
head. Like that's the way I was trained.
Uh-huh.
I
And
quick
then tell him like 10 times to do that. And he's like, what is your deal?
so I still people unfortunately see people do that
Oh
today.
yeah.
I was trained that way and I want to say like by a year or two, I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
And but it's all a bigger concept and a bigger picture for newer BCBAs to think about that when you're observing your clients and their skills and their strengths and you presume they understand, that's how you include them in the goal making process, right? Like if
Yeah.
like once you could see that Dylan could sequence the letters, it's like, wait, let's do more with these letters. He
Mm-hmm.
likes letters. So like
Mm-hmm.
him doing that shows us that's something he would like to do more of. And that in itself is him choosing what kinds of things he'd like to do. And I remember he loved letters and numbers at that age.
Yeah, he still does. And it's funny because, he does talk a lot more and he was
Yep.
very persistent of trying to get you to understand what he's saying.
Yep.
He won't let it go. But now it's kind of cool because he tries to, if you don't get it, he starts either trying to write it down or he'll spell it out, which
Which
is
is
cool. So,
so amazing
yeah.
because in younger years it would make him upset, rightfully
Mm-hmm.
so, rightfully
Mm-hmm.
so, but to the point where he might become aggressive because you didn't
Mm-hmm.
understand, which I don't blame him, frankly. Every time that would happen, I'd be like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is my fault. I'm not understanding you. I should take the kick. Right? When he'd say, kick Kelly.
Yeah.
I'm like, yep, I
Well,
deserve
luckily
it.
he doesn't say that much anymore.
I'd always be like, I deserve it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Teasing. But I think so, this video isn't it was for World Down Syndrome Day, but to me and so many of my colleagues like started posting it saying like we need to be thinking about this for everybody. And it just
For sure.
for autism month, I'm just calling it autism month because wherever you fall in the autism world and community, that's where you're at. And that's
Mm-hmm.
your group and where you're at. But the concepts are still the same, right? Like include the individual. Our ethics tell us that into the goal making process and consider their preferences and likes, not just as reinforcers, but like skills to grow and improve on. And so like think about that, Jen. Dylan, is much more verbal now than ever. But if I'm going back, so he started sequencing letters. He hates writing, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's always hated writing. A lot of kids on the spectrum do not like writing. It's hard for them.
Mm-hmm.
But typing and then like
Mm-hmm.
using the computer and
Yeah,
like
typing. Yeah.
apps and making choices and like if you look back like he was telling us all along like this is the method I learn in, these are the things I
Mm-hmm.
enjoy, this is how I want to do it.
Or he would, another thing he would do with, he would have that easel
Yes.
and
Yep.
he would draw on it, but
Yep.
he would spend a really long time drawing something, and then you'd be like, "What is it?" And he would totally be, it's usually animal or something, but he was very serious about it. But
Yep. Yep.
but that was a way of expressing stuff too, in
Yeah.
his way, and he
Uh-huh.
loves the animals.
He does. And so for both caregivers and BCBAs listening to this podcast, like think beyond the preference assessment. It's not just to determine reinforcers, it's a way for the client to express what not only their likes and interests are, but like potential goals, like how they might like to expand further in those areas. And that's their way of saying, this is what I want to do. And those are socially valid, which improves quality of life, which is what we're always talking about on this podcast,
Yeah, for sure. I
right?
will admit on that video, the one
Yep.
part as a parent that I
Yep.
saw, which we have a situation. Obviously, Dylan is going to need long-term care, obviously. But when I saw the parent part of living at the home, and I felt I definitely had a little laugh at myself, I will admit, when I saw that part. I was like, yeah, I'm probably pretty guilty of this part of this video.
Like when they're all brushing their teeth together.
Yeah, and like, yeah,
Yeah.
going and yeah,
And they wipe her
yeah,
mouth. I was
yeah,
thinking the same thing. And
yeah.
poor Bill, my husband, I'm gonna bust on him again, but he's a fantastic dad, and he
Mhm.
has, like, Melanie, for she is capable of living on her own with a lot of scaffolding, which we do a lot
Mhm.
of, tons of it. But she wanted to live on her own. And there's no question we were holding her back because we were doing her laundry, but we started doing the little things like make your bed and do your laundry, but
Mhm.
we were still, getting the groceries, cooking the food, making all her point, like doing all the stuff for her. And it wasn't until we started thinking about what it might like. And we didn't know she wanted to live on her own because she never told us that. But she had a friend over her computer that she video game chat with, and he lived on his own. And then he was inviting her to live with him. He lives across the country in Kansas, and she was started like all of a sudden buying pots and pans. And we're like, what are you doing?
What?
And she's like, because she worked at the grocery store and they'd have
Yeah.
the pot sales, the pots and pans, and she'd bring them home. And we're like, we didn't need any more. She's like, they're for me. And then when she starts stacking them in her room, we're like, what is happening? Dishes and pots and pans. We started to ask her the questions, and then we finally figured out, oh, you might like to live on your own. But she
Mhm.
couldn't put it together at that point. But
Yeah,
by observing her behavior, we figured it
that's
out,
great.
right?
That's actually very cool.
And so then we have to like go through all the list of things to go on their own. That's a whole other podcast I can do where like all the
Mhm.
things you never thought about. But even
Yeah.
for
Oh,
Dylan,
yeah.
transitioning one day, if he does, into a group home, that's a
Mhm.
huge transition for him, and like
Oh, yeah,
all the things to prep for that.
for sure.
And so let me ask you, do you have any indication Dylan might want to live somewhere else? Because
I don't think at this point, unless it's at Grandma Jan's house.
And that's interesting because we didn't notice it till Melanie until she was like 25, 26.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then she's 30, she's about to be 34. She moved out at 27. So it was several years in the whole process, but it's
Yeah.
like observing and including them. Like you see what they're
Mhm.
doing and include that, and that becomes the goal.
For sure.
All
One
right.
other thing with
Mhm.
the video I thought of, like, that is very funny with Dylan is, like, I mean, of course, he still has his, like, he loves Bluey, but who doesn't, right?
Right, right.
But that the part of the Shakespeare thing,
Yep.
like, it reminds me think of Dylan too, because Dylan loves to go to like age appropriate, like, live, theater and things like that. Like, he loves it,
He does.
that
Yeah.
that we would all want to go to. But I'm sure people would just assume, like, take him to, whatever, Barney Live or whatever, you know what I mean?
I think that's a really great point because I
Mhm.
think a lot of people just meeting Dylan and not knowing him would pass that judgment and think he couldn't do it.
Mhm.
Yep. Yep. Well, assume that I can. That is our motto going forward. I hope people get a chance to watch the video and enjoyed this podcast and can really think about socially valid goals that are meaningful and including your clients based on purely observation and asking them to whatever way they can show you what they really want, whether it's tell you or show you, including them in as soon as you can. All right. Have a great night, Jen. Thanks as
You
always.
too. I love it. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.